All right, Steve. So thanks again for joining us. Very excited to have this chat today.
Yeah, I'm actually excited to be here. So I know you've got an interesting audience.
Nice. Thank you so much. Yeah, and just to give everyone a little bit of context and intro, Steve is a really well-seasoned entrepreneur. He's built a ton of different businesses. So we want to have him come on and just kind of give everyone some more information about his story, what he's learned along the way, what struggles he's had, tell us a little bit about his successes, and I think we can all learn a lot from that. So
yeah, and I also want to jump in and say that as opposed to somebody who's been there and done it and giving you advice, I'm there and doing it right now. I'm in a startup right now, so my advice is fresh in the moment, as opposed to giving you a historical lesson on startups.
Yes, and I find that's very helpful too. I definitely noticed kind of after when you get out of the, I guess, builder phase into more the scaling phase, you do forget some of the things. So when you start building again, they kind of come up and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot that this is something that matters or something we have to focus on.
Well, I certainly have a few things to share, but if you want, I'll start with just my historical perspective. I was the CEO of 3 different international sales and marketing companies for about 25 years, did about $4 billion in sales. So that means I do have a little experience in online and offline marketing in every single aspect of it. After I sold my last company, I do what most CEOs do. We become consultants to our old competitors, so we get even with them one more time as we make them pay us. And then I opened up a technology company, so I would be a better consultant. And for those of you that may have heard of the company Mary Kay, with about 3.1 million distributors around the world, they were my #1 client. I built them an onboarding app called The Great Start for all their people who start with them selling products. And Zoom approached me about building a solution because they were just about to go public and they wanted as much market share as possible and wanted to leverage my relationships. So I said I wasn't interested in reselling Zoom. I said, but if you give me unprecedented access to your APIs, I think I could build an experience for all those Mary Kay reps, as well as other people who work with affiliates or work at home businesses. And lo and behold, we became the largest ISV partner to Zoom in the world for almost 4 straight years, which is a fancy way of saying we brought them more customers than anybody else but themselves. And then once you have CEO in your genes, you still either have your arrogant or ignorant moment, I call it, where I went to Zoom and I said, I know what Webinar 2.0 needs to be. I said, nothing really has changed in the 4 years that I'm selling it. And I think it's time for webinars to be interactive. Not just share a screen and talk to people, but actually be able to buy products, enroll in programs, sign contracts, book Calendly meetings, take tests. Whatever you can do on a website, you should be able to do in a webinar. They said, Steve, we really appreciate you bringing us as many customers as you do. In fact, we appreciate that more than you bring us your ideas. And so we'll just want to continue the way we work. So instead, I brought them my termination letter. And it took me 1.5 years to now, instead of partner with Zoom, to be a competitor.
Wow.
And where I wasn't arrogant is I didn't really think I could, and this is a lesson for all of you. Don't think you can necessarily build something better than your competition, because that's arguable. But you could always build something different and argue that your difference is better. And so what I would say to you is that Zoom is $25 billion, 2,000 global engineers. I don't think I built a better share of screen. But here's the 3 experiences I built that they cannot build on their platform. We can take virtually any website in the world and make it completely interactive for up to 600 people at the same time, with no integration, no setup, no download required. Work with absolutely any website in any country in any language in the world, all at the touch of a button. We could also do the same thing in a recording. So you don't even have to be there. You can make a recording, turn the pages of your website, and have your guest be interactive at any time the call to action that you decide. And the third, and not final, but third most important thing, is we're the only company in the world that can create multiple invite links to the same meeting. Those invite links can track all the customers that someone brings and also track it to their affiliate or replicated websites, so they get credit for the sale, even though they're not even speaking on the webinar. So that is a foundational difference of a product that I would argue is different, and I would argue is better.
There's a saying that reminds me of the riches are in the niches. And so I guess with that in mind, would you say your niche that you're building into is the webinar space?
Well, there's 550 million people a day that get on a live webinar, 100 million more in recording, and no one can touch a screen. And so what I would say to you, if you're in a startup company right now, and I think people get distracted about what's my market share and what's my potential in terms of the audience. It's much better to have an audience that's already using a product and you have a better version than creating a product that they've never purchased. And so I've got to convince 550 million people who are paying a subscription every single month that our product is better. That's an easier road than convincing them to buy a product they currently don't have in their portfolio.
Definitely. And so your main customer then in that space, I assume, is B2B, probably big companies that whose main sales process is through webinars.
So combination. So if you follow Gary Vee at all, right, he would tell you that live shopping is the most important invention since the internet itself in the next decade. We can appeal direct to every single person who has an Amazon site, Shopify site, a retail site, and turn their website instantaneously into a live shopping event. No one else can do that in the world. Insurance companies. I'm saying the average person who signs a policy on an insurance company takes 5 days to go through DocuSign. Now with customer service, they can do that in 15 minutes. Real estate companies now can actually close transactions on our webinar platform with their compliance software, because you can even have software now that notarizes signatures online. And so educational companies, we're involved right now in negotiations in the superintendent of schools in St. Louis. I'm saying who handles millions of students, who doesn't want to wait for the next COVID to decide what an online, offline interactive experience is. So like Zoom is we're vertical neutral. The use case is up to the person who purchases the product, whether that be B2B, where they're buying the license of their employees. In fact, I have a Microsoft employee who's in charge of selling lead gen for the automobile industry, bought 29 licenses for his employees because he said, our software will sell Microsoft software better than Microsoft Teams.
Nice. Love it. And just so everyone gets some context on the timeline, do you want to provide a bit more color into when you started working on this business, when you officially launched, and then what kind of phase you're in right now?
Yeah, so when Zoom approached me, it was really 6 months before they went public and 6 more COVID. I knew nothing really about the webinar business prior to that, but it certainly had technology. And what I would say to you, why is that important? I would say to you is that your ideas get you in the door. But if you want people to invest in your company, just remember they invest in you. Because your idea could be outdated in 20 minutes, but you're still going to be there. And the reason people invest in you is because they believe when you have to pivot and something goes wrong, you're the guy that can do it. You can hire anybody to run a company on the way up. But the real valuable in management, leadership, and visionaries is what happens when the company stalls and when the company needs to pivot. That's when you should be the CEO of a company. That's the person that people invest in. So it was after COVID, and we have our greatest success. I mean, being the largest reseller in Zoom in the world is a pretty huge accomplishment. That's the time where I decided I needed to do something different. If you decide you want to do something out of need and desperation, you're a day short in order to make that happen. And so at my highest level of success is when I called my team together, who I always say is 25-year-olds, so make me look good. I'm saying, and said, now we have a problem. We're successful. This isn't going to last forever. Now let's be our most creative, because we have the resources, we have the time, and all we need is the vision.
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch kind of the growth of a company. I think a lot go through really similar environments where they start some new growth plan that works extremely well, and it maybe takes them from $0 to $100 a month, and they feel amazing. Everyone feels on top of the world. We went from 0 revenue to 100. I'm the best. And then they run that again the next month, and they go from 100 to 200, and they go, okay, 100% growth. This is amazing. Let's keep going. And then they go 200 to 300, 50%. And then, 300 to 400, 25%. And you can kind of see where this is going, where it kind of creates, I think, that mindset, a lot of zombie companies that just kind of have that kind of stagnant growth where things just start to level off and everyone gets comfortable. Super, super common for startups to find themselves in that situation. And I would argue most founders, while they're building, find themselves in that situation. And it's just the people who are really good at adapting and adjusting to trends and really hungry to kind of keep building that can get on top of going, okay, this worked, but we're too comfortable. We need to take another big risk and we need to take that next step.
Well, I can tell you that when you walk away from a secure income, an umbrella drink on the beach period of time of your life to start over and risk everything, that's when you can consider yourself an entrepreneur. And so whether you're 25 or 65, I think you're judged by the risk you're willing to take. And so that's where I feel, for me, is I've seen so many interviews with CEOs of some of the most successful companies in the world, and they ask them, and some of the ones the most successful today, and they say, if you had a chance, would you do it all over again? And most of them say no, it wasn't worth the sacrifice. And I would tell you that I'm the opposite. I would do it all again, and I wish I had more time to do more, because it's the fear of failure is what is an adrenaline rush. If you know you're going to be successful, where's the fun, right? If you have enough money to lose, where's the risk? But when you really put it all on the line, and especially for a startup, I think you have to make a decision early on. Are you competing against other startups, or are you competing against the big guys? And how you see that determines your entire conversation and how you show up at an investor meeting. I was invited to many of these tech startup perspectives. And when I would walk in, because of my experience, they would thought I was an investor versus a startup myself, right? And so everyone would come up to me and they would tell me all about their companies, thinking I was going to invest in theirs. And I could tell you the one common denominator that they always were lacking is the use case for their own technology. Because they looked at, because most of them are young, right? When you're 25 years old, you're not limited about how smart you are, but you're limited of your reference points. So their world is not the world they were building their product for. And so if they're only building a product for the world they know, it's a pretty limited world in that sense. And so most of my advice to them was to think beyond their own expertise. Because people always tell you in our business, build what you know. No, that's not going to make you money. That's going to make you a small startup. But to build something beyond your own expertise, that knowledge is available. You could become an expert today. When I started out, you didn't have that advantage. Information wasn't as available as it is today. You could pretty much become an expert in anything you choose to be. And make sure, if you're going to have a startup company, that you don't have something with limitations and low ceilings. So even if you're successful, you're going to have to pivot anyway, because the market wasn't big enough to support your vision.
It's interesting. I've actually started seeing some investors talking about similar things. If you look at the height of kind of the fundraising craze in like 2020, 2021, all investors were talking about founder market fit, right? Invest in people who have built in the space and lived in the space for a while. And that's what they focused on. And I think that worked extremely well at the time, because most people were raising money pre-product, and then they could use their expertise in that space to build a good product and to launch and get some initial customers. But a lot of investors have recently been saying the opposite. Like, a lot of the successes are actually coming from people with no industry experience. And in my opinion, what this is kind of showing is it's not really the people who know a lot about the industry going in that are successful. It's the people who can learn along the way and continue to improve and iterate. So these days, people typically raise post-product. Not many people invest pre-product right now. It's just kind of with the nature of the market. So if you're investing in a company that's post-product, I think it's actually typically better to invest in the founder that got there with zero knowledge, zero resources. They just figured shit out, versus the founder that had everything in their ball camp So yeah, that's kind of my own thoughts on this. And it is echoing that same thing you've been saying, where once you launch, I mean, pretty much it all just comes on to you figuring shit out and improving things as you go along. So yeah, I love that. You did mention a lot about being an experienced CEO. So I did want to ask you more questions about that, unless you have any more on this topic.
No, go right ahead. I mean, there's other things I'll talk about with startups that I'll weave into the conversation, but sure, fire away.
So yeah, why don't you tell us about kind of your first work as a CEO, building up, I think in the telecom space, 3 different companies to 4 billion in revenue. I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so they were sales and marketing companies.
Okay.
And we sold everything from lotions, potions, pills to technology, you name it. And one of the things that led me to that, one of the best inventions I ever had, was the most expensive cost for people who were salespeople were their phone bills. And so at that particular time, VoIP had first come on the market. And it was only sold commercially. And I went to a company called Broadway in Dallas, who was the first nationwide VoIP network. And I said to them, would you be willing to do a beta test with me? And this story is probably the leading startup story that I could share. I said, would you be willing to do a beta test with me for residential use? And they said, well, we don't know. It's not tested. It's very high risk. I said, I'm willing to take the risk. So they agreed. And within 30 days, I sold unlimited long distance for the first time ever as a concept for $79.95 a month. That's when people were used to paying 5 and 10 cents a minute for long distance. So I didn't invent the technology, but I go back to I invented the use case. 100,000 customers in 30 days, except, the Verizon commercial today where they go, can you hear me now? Back then with VoIP, the answer was no. So I had 100,000 people pay me that amount of money who had terrible quality phone service. Talk about pivot. What do you do? Do I go to Broadway and complain? They warned me that their technology may not have been able to support it. So I called up AT&T and I said, I need the cheapest price per minute that I could possibly buy time for. And they said, why? I said, it doesn't matter. I'll personally guarantee it. Okay. They said, sure. Okay. And I created a breakage model. And I realized from the 30 days that I had customers running that 20% of my customers hardly use the phone, even though they paid me $79.95. 20% of the customers killed me. They use like 10,000 minutes a month, which negated that 20. And as long as I could manage the traffic of the 60% in the middle and make a decent profit, I had a business model. That business model became so successful that AT&T, MCI, WorldCom, and all those companies copied that business model and put me out of business by selling it for $49.95 in the body of your local phone service. But you go, is that a bad ending or a good ending? No, it was a great ending because I became a celebrity in the telecommunications world and immediately got offered unlimited number of positions overseas and in Europe to run telecommunication companies. So success and failure is never judged by the moment, but it's judged by the opportunity it creates. And so what I say to you, it's use cases number one. Your customer acquisition code is a lot more valuable than your technology code. Always. Right? And combining that with the CEO experience, I can tell you you're only as good as the people you hire, no matter how good you are. And when you're hiring somebody, the first thing you do is turn over the resume. And the only question you need to ask somebody when you're interviewing them is, what can you do for me? How are you going to make my life easier? How is it when I come to work in the morning, I'm going to be so glad you're there because you're going to do what? Because I don't care necessarily what people have accomplished. I care what they want to accomplish, because then I can reach somebody. If somebody walks into my office with their best days behind them, I'm not interested. So it's not about age and experience. It's about vision and desire.
Yeah,
and if you can develop a team around you with that attitude, you can conquer anything.
Yeah, I like to say people are either a hell yes or a hell no. Team's so important. It kind of drives everything. One thing that you brought up actually that I think is an interesting kind of piece to dissect is about one of the big companies coming in and kind of copying what you did. This is a contentious topic in the startup space. A lot of new founders are asking, like, are my ideas going to get copied? And they can be pretty scared of that. I actually have my own story about getting copied. So during the pandemic, I built a health screening app for sports clubs and leagues. We were the first one available, and it just kind of blew up. And then a bunch of people started copying us. Now, when we were building this, we were talking to a bunch of the different sports organizations about them using this health screening platform. And they were all saying, yeah, we need this, so we'll pick it up. And then they went back to the sports apps that they were working with at the time and said, hey, we need to use this this health screening app. Are you guys okay with building this? And they all said, no, we're not going to build it. And then as soon as these sports clubs signed with us, all of a sudden, all these other groups started building it. So it's this thing that I've seen over and over where people will copy success, but they never copy ideas. So once you build something that actually starts making money, all of a sudden everyone starts coming in trying to replicate that success.
Well, let me say a couple of things about that. If you're not copied, it wasn't a very good idea in the first place. So you better hope that you're copying, right? Number two is they're copying yesterday's idea, not tomorrow's. And if you're a one idea wonder, you shouldn't have probably been there in the first place. Second thing, people always talk about patents. Patents are great for investors to feel more comfortable, but when it comes to running a business, they're meaningless. You know why? It costs, let's say, $10,000 to apply for patents, but it costs millions of dollars to defend them. And those same investors that insisted that you get the patent are not writing the check. So would you rather spend your money in the courtroom? Or would you rather spend it in the marketplace? So welcome the competition. I can tell you this, that one thing that always amazed me in my Zoom experience was I always said that if you think about it, Microsoft and Google had far more money and far more engineers than Zoom. How come during the 3 years of COVID, they never could close the gap? And so I was telling that story to somebody who actually worked at Google at the time. And he said, I was there and I was in the boardroom when I saw on the whiteboard 3,500 ideas to close the gap between us and Zoom with the word unlimited resources, unlimited money, but not unlimited time. And yet they never made a dent. And the guy said to me, and I'm not trying to be complimentary to you, and he says, you know why they didn't close the gap? Because they didn't have someone like you. They had engineers, but they didn't have a visionary. They didn't have someone who understood the product, how someone was going to use it, what was the most important things to the millions of people, the 300 million people a day that were using the product. No one in that room understood that person. They were just writing code. And so that's where I go back to, how could you be copied? You can't be copied. Just the moment can be copied if you truly are a visionary. I mean, look at Apple. Since Steve Jobs died, when was the last time someone waited online for the next edition of the Apple phone to come out? What innovation can you talk about in the past decade that speaks to Tim Cook other than his P&L statement, which he's done a brilliant job of, right? But right now, is there anything that Android doesn't have that Apple has that, or they're not going to have tomorrow? Speak about copying. There is no proprietary difference anymore between those two phone systems. But when Steve Jobs was alive, there was, and not because of a patent. So that's what I'm saying.
So I'm actually a big believer in that myself. And I think this is one of the more maybe controversial areas of the startup space where, I mean, if you compare, for example, Facebook versus MySpace, why has one become a $1 trillion company and the other is just kind of a fringe use case now? And I think the reason for that really is Zuckerberg, and the way he goes about running a company is he's always thinking, okay, what is the next step we have to take? What is the next thing we have to work on to continue scaling up? And it's allowed him to build something that's truly massive that Decimate.world is trying to tackle. So, but
so here's an interesting perspective, and this is where I would say to you, Zuckerberg proved what a good business guy he was. Build it or buy it, right? Why did he buy Instagram? Why did he buy WhatsApp? Could he not have knocked off the code with all of his resources and time and perspective? Because I remember I said to you in the beginning, the most important code was a customer acquisition code, and he couldn't compete with them. That's what he knew. Didn't matter if he built a better WhatsApp or a better Instagram. He didn't have the customer acquisition code in those two areas. And so that's a brilliant pivot to go build it or spend $20 billion to go buy it. That was not exactly an applauded decision at the time. He was really criticized when he did that acquisition in terms of CEOs going resources versus upside. Turned out to be a brilliant move.
Yeah, and his recent move, I mean, is what, hundreds of millions to acquire AI researchers, which I mean, we'll see. This, in my opinion, every startup or technology company, their kind of end game will eventually be building their own AI models. I think you kind of have to continue pivoting and iterating until every company will kind of be competing in that space. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this evolves as more and more of companies.
The greatest thing about AI is that it allowed everyone to be an instantaneous creator, right? I mean, there's probably 10,000 companies created a month off of three AI companies, right? And that's what I go back to. It's about the use case of AI that is now the geniuses, right? As opposed to the guy who could build a better AI, right? How many companies are trying to build a better AI than ChatGPT? What is there, 4 companies in the world? I'm saying that have the potential resources to even, if they could do it, want to do it. But yet everyone else is a level playing field, right? To take that technology, train that technology, adapt that technology, integrate that technology into a use case that someone else doesn't see. That's still, you can literally go to market in 4 to 6 weeks now from idea, as opposed to 4 to 6 months is from a traditional coding perspective. It's a phenomenal opportunity.
And it's interesting to see how things adjust as that happens. And I think we're seeing, I mean, distribution networks and channels are extremely important now because, I mean, there's more and more products that can be built, right? So you need more and more creative ways of getting the word out there. I am curious if you feel like, or how you feel like timing is different now based on the pre-AI space. So is timing really relevant in your space and what the work you're doing with Pxch, or is it something that you're kind of building, I guess, almost as an antithesis to?
Yeah, I would say to you, again, real world, right, versus theoretical world, is it took us 1.5 years pre-AI to build Pxch. And again, the only company in the world that can do what we do. We thought we were so proud of ourselves. We thought that was a major accomplishment. Still to this day, 100 days later, we're the only company in the world that can do it. But what I realized is we didn't build ourselves for an AI world. We built ourselves for a webinar world. And so we, even again, after only 100 days in a soft market launch of introducing the concept to people, we immediately went back and rewrote our entire code from ground zero, creating our platform to live in the AI world. And so timing, yeah, you've got to have a self-awareness about constantly things that are changing. And as I talk about having that ability to pivot, having that vision, having those resources. So now we will not only be the preeminent webinar platform in the world with our interactivity, we'll be the preeminent AI interactive webinar platform in the world. And again, it goes back to use case. Many people make a mistake by just trying to put AI in everything. Now it's like the recipe. I mean, you have to go, as opposed to, is it a distraction or is it foundationally making your product superior? And so for us, an example of AI use cases is now we have not just having an AI agent support the host during the meeting, but support the guests to be able to answer questions and take them on a journey that maybe the host isn't taking them on. Imagine watching a recorded video that's interactive. You can take the action. When the recording's over, the AI agent is there to have an interactive conversation with you to say, how can I help you take the next step? So very pragmatic uses of AI. Because remember, I'm competing against $25 billion companies, not the other startup. And so the technology is available to all of us, but the vision and the use case of it is quite different.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard to break into a new market. And that's why I think a lot of startups, a lot of companies need to rely on these new technologies coming to fruition. Decimate.world is about helping new companies launch. And I think one of the reasons this can exist now as a concept is because it's significantly easier to build now. So these new companies can actually launch, competitive products with the established industry giants. Javelin Sports, my other company, which is a volleyball company. So we're one of the largest adult rec volleyball clubs in North America, all ran through a mobile app. That's actually takes the anti-position on AI, saying like, hey, everyone's going to get kind of sick of all this online stuff. And we think people will want to do stuff in person, want to build kind of community and stuff. So we're helping people kind of socialize and connect through a mobile app.
And where I agree with you in that sense is I don't use AI to replace people. I use AI to create more people contacts and interactions. And so I think that's the right blend, right? I think absolutely is this concept of, you don't need people, you need AI agents instead. No, let them handle the 80% of the mundane, but to create an opportunity where that 20% of where people do want to engage with somebody at a higher level, drive them to that 20%. That's where AI is great.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I'm really pro competition. I think you want as much competition as possible, just within an economy. And I think the amount of competition that AI can help push us towards is going to do great things, but we just need to be proactive with it.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess, what was it like kind of building through the initial .com bubble? Was there anything you learned from then that you think you can apply to today?
Again, it comes down to your team. I always built things that didn't exist. And so that's a different type of culture in your company that you need to have. And so when I walk into the team and I'm saying, why can't we do something? And usually it's because I found some other use case of a similar technology somewhere else. So I walked in with a premise of why I believe something could be built. And they had to go that last mile to make it for a use case where I saw a bigger vision. But I don't think the keys to success have changed. It's just the cost and the resources have come so far down. The barrier to entry doesn't exist anymore. So the requirement isn't to get investor money before you can build a prototype in order to prove the model to another round. And like I say, you can literally, for such little money, go to market and prove your model without investors. See, my issue with investors is I very rarely got across from an investor who was ever a CEO. Or if they were a CEO and they sold a tech company really early on and they were arrogant, didn't really understand. I just never sat across the table from the guy who went, I see where you got where you are, and I'd be so thrilled not just to have your money, but to have a partnership with you. I'm saying I think what you'll find when you go through is that magical guy is never going to be across the table. The magical guy is you. And you have to remember that you're there in a sense thinking you're lucky if they invest in you. The truth is it's the opposite. They're the ones who feel lucky that they found you. And you have to remember that, is you're the value in that meeting, not them. And how you communicate that is a big part of the decision whether they decide to go forward. But what I always hate is, you start off with some junior person in the company with his 20 KPIs, and if you don't have those KPIs, you don't go to the next level, right? Those are the companies that never find the winners. Because the truth is, you have to break the rules in order to be remarkably successful in anything in life. And so if you walk in and all they have is their rules, and they wonder why they never hit a home run,
Yeah,
it's really hard to find that cultural match with investor groups.
You are, I think, seeing a big correction in the VC space right now, where for a while, a ton of people could raise funds off of, theses and stuff, and just get something out there and start throwing money at industries. And I think it's really starting to heavily correct into people realizing that it really just does come down to the founding team, to the founders. Like, are they going to be able to continue building this thing up to a massive valuation, right? It's not just about launching. It's not your initial idea. It's just everything, the massive load of work. Is this a person who can get through all of that? And I think we're starting to see, just based on how few funds are actually continuing to raise VC funding, it's actually, most firms don't do a great job identifying founders like that. So we are in a bit of a transitionary period where we're consolidating to a few major funds. I'm hopeful we'll see some new funds come out of this, though, that do a good job with picking the winners, but we will see.
Right. No, as a founder, don't build a company for an exit strategy. Assume this is your child, you're going to have it for life. And that's why it's so important when you take money that you don't want to turn over control of the child to them.
Oh yeah. No, I remember when I first started building, I was really, I really looked up to VCs and investors, and I thought they had kind of all these great ideas all the time. And as I started learning more and more about building and scaling, I started to realize that the feedback they were giving me was kind of bad. It was an interesting situation to be in.
Yeah, I'm with you that, it's a rare skill set to be a owner, operated CEO, founder. That's a much rarer skill set than a guy sitting on a VC fund who's going to take a chance on 10 companies and be wrong probably in all 10, most likely by the end of the year.
Well, in the startup space, when you're going for extreme outcomes, it's better to be extreme in very certain narrow ways than it is to be just on average very good. So if you think about the context of, like, in my opinion, there are 4 important skills for building a startup. And those are building a good product, sales and marketing, team building, and fundraising. It's very rare to find someone who's even good at one of those things, much less being exceptional at one of those things, much less someone who's good at multiple of those things, right? And you only need to be really exceptional depending on the timing of the space that you're building in. Like, in many cases, you only need to be exceptional at one of those things to be successful. And it's really rare to find people who can do that. And the overlap between that and being a good investor they're completely 2 different skill sets.
And let me say this, out of your 4, the one that matters the most by far without debate is the sales and marketing. Because a good sales and marketer doesn't need the best product in order to be successful. So the guy who builds the best product doesn't always win, but the person who knows how to sell even the second or third best product, right? There's so many in history, whether it be Edison and Tesla, whether it be VHS and Beta, right? Where the best product lost to sales and marketing, right?
So actually,
I'm just saying to you that the problem is with most startups, especially in the technology space, is they're founded by eggheads who are terrible at sales and marketing. And so they spend all their energy and all their resources on developing the product. And then they hire somebody at the end, or they bring somebody in at the very end who they think is going to be their sales and marketing guy. And he's the weak link as opposed to the strength. Because the same passion that went involved in building the product that owner founder didn't put in to think of what it takes to go to market. They think go to markets and, oh, by the way, it's at the end of this process of this great thing that you created. When the truth is you have to work backwards from sales and marketing. As a CEO, if you don't know what the customer needs or what the customer will pay or what the business will buy it for, you're going to end up clueless. So that's where I'm saying to you, it's not an equality of 4. There's one that drives the other 3.
So with that in mind, I was kind of wondering, do you have one major big piece of advice that you like to give new founders?
There's just so many critical components. But I would say, and I go back to what I started this conversation, is you've got to know who you are and what you bring to the table and what you need that you don't have. Because what you're afraid of is what they'll see. So that's what I go back to, that they're going ultimately to invest in you and not your idea. You think your idea is everything because that's what you put all your effort into. And the truth is, if you're really good, you know what they'll say to you? We have another company over here that's struggling. Before we invest in your idea, we put you over here because you're so charismatic, you're so powerful, you're such a visionary that skill set, we may not be sold on your idea, but we're sold on you. So, because I guarantee you that if 10 people come in the door, are they going to remember the best idea of the day, or they remember the most impressive person? They're always going to remember the person. Charisma outsells idea every single time. But is it a perfect marriage when you and your idea are indistinguishable?
Yeah. There's a saying for investor, I guess, when investors pass on you, and that's to believe the no, but not the why. Right. In my opinion, the why is always the founder. I mean, it's always just fundamentally, if they say, like, we don't believe in the market, it's we didn't believe in your ability or your analysis of the market or your ability to capture this market. So,
and also I would say to you, humble confidence is attractive. Arrogance is not. And the other important advice is know when to pivot on your idea. Don't be so obsessed with your idea that it's going to limit you of what your opportunities are. Because yes, there's those stories where 1,000 people said no to me and I stuck with it and I said yes, but out of those 1,000 people, probably 990 of them should have walked away from their idea. Not everyone is always wrong when they tell you your idea isn't great. So you've got to make that decision. Is this the idea that I want to build the rest of my life on and I'm willing to make all the sacrifices? Or is there a better idea inside of me? Because this one is not resonating with people. So know when to fight for it, but also it's not failure to pivot from it. It's actually pretty smart.
Yeah. For me,
or evolve it.
For me, definitely, I feel like the adversity and the people who have said no and have told me my idea is crap have helped me more than the people who have just said, oh yeah, it's great. Being able to, talk to someone honestly about this type of thing, get their blunt feedback, understand how other people might have concerns and understand something about your messaging or your distribution is wrong. That's incredibly valuable. And overall, I think those types of conversations strengthen founders a lot. And that, in my opinion, is one of the most important things you need, not even just to be a successful entrepreneur, but to be successful in general is just strength.
Right. No, remember, Steve Jobs was not a fan of customer focus groups. It's like that's the last person he wanted to hear about his idea from, right? So that's what I meant is when you're a visionary and you see things that other people don't see and you ask the opinions, you're asking opinions about someone who don't see your vision. And so you're not going to resonate. But there is some times where someone does see your vision and they may say to you, you need to rethink yours. And nothing wrong with taking that moment too.
Thanks, Steve. If you're all right, I did make a bit of a diagram before the call because this was, I guess, an area of topic I thought we might jump into. Sure. So maybe I'll share my screen and show everyone kind of my opinions on the skill sets that founders have. Okay, can you see this okay?
Yeah. Cool.
So this is just a list of founding team skills and then kind of how timing can influence how important they are. So I actually tried to order these based on more on the B2C side versus the B2B side. So maybe something I disagree with you a little bit on is I think sales and marketing is by far the most important in B2B. But I think as you get more into the consumer, it starts to shift to more the product being really important. And some examples of this is like how Cursor just kind of blew up overnight because they had a really good developer IDE. With that being said, again, all of these are incredibly important. And then we come down to timing, where how many things you really need to execute on depends on where you are on this timing space. So the newest AI companies, they can just build something great and have it blow up, or they can just have a really good marketing and sales channel and get a ton of signups and then use that to build the company around those signups. And then as you get into older and older technologies, things do tend to become significantly more difficult and your team needs to be good at a ton of different things. Again, that's team building, product building, fundraising, and sales and marketing if you're building on a very, very old technology in a very established space. Any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, a lot of it is crossover and blend. And I'll go back to Steve Jobs for an example. And he once was talking about what's the difference how he sells Apple versus the way Microsoft sold their computers or their phones. So he says, if you see a Microsoft commercial, what do? They explain all their features, right? They explain why their product does this and does that, why it's better. When you saw an Apple commercial, you didn't even see the product. But yet, Steve Jobs was obsessed on the product experience, the packaging experience, right? Every single aspect of it, right? And so what I say to you is product building and sales and marketing intertwined, even to a greater degree, 100%.
Yeah,
right?
it is really hard. I think everything comes down to branding between those two. Your branding is so important in the startup space and it's so powerful. And that's one of the really tough things for early stage founders to compete with is you build a good product, let's say, and it starts scaling really rapidly. but your technology can't handle the growth, and then things start slowing down, and then your brand goes down the drain. Like, how do you handle that situation?
I was going to say there's two things, right? I always started a company under the assumption I would never raise money and I would have to self-fund. And if you go with that approach, you handle your resources and the way you hire people very differently than if you're leading with fundraising and then I'm going to put my team together. So I never waited for fundraising and to execute my idea. And neither did Apple, right? I mean, they started in a garage, they sold 50 computers. They gave the guy $800 back who gave him the money so they could build the 50 computers. And from that point on, they basically did self-fund until they became a certain size company. And so that's what I would say to you is I would cross fundraising off because I think in some ways that stops the person from getting started. It's an excuse not to get started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me too. I mean, I agree. I think if you can be in a position to build with the assumption that you'll never need to raise fundraising, that's the best position to be in. Most founders, I encourage them to assume they'll never raise fundraising if they're not in a really hot space, because frankly, there's not a lot of money going around for things that aren't AI these days.
Well, I always say to people that if you have the secret to any success that I've been involved in is I had enough time and money. And because of the way I built the company, not because I had more money than I needed, right? But I took every step in a way that I was never going to run out of money and I was never going to run out of time. No. And if your ideas are that timely, then it's a bad idea to begin with. So if your idea is only good for 6 months and you're afraid someone's going to beat you to market or now it becomes outdated, it's just proof to you it was a wrong concept to start your business with. And so that's what I meant. Like if you look at the webinar business, that's not going away after COVID, right? I'm saying that, Zoom sales have gone up, not down, right? So at the end of the day, that it crossed from being a trendy moment to a main staple that's never going away. Different versions of it will be, different players will come in, but now you've got a product that you could build on that will last forever, as opposed to in 5 years, no, the webinars are going to go away. There'll be a different version of a webinar, different technology. Maybe it's immersive, right? Maybe it's virtual reality, but you're still going to have that experience of people wanting to connect with each other that aren't in the same room as the
people
premise.
Generally will overestimate what they can accomplish in a year, but underestimate what they can accomplish in 3. The way that things just gradually compound over time, if you truly do just stick with it long enough, you typically eventually start finding something that works.
Yeah.
And then it's just up to you.
I was going to say the only way that you can build that way, like I learned in the beginning, I built everything myself. Right? And by the time I finished it, with all the resources I put in, now I was stuck to get the ROI out because I spent all my money on building it and I couldn't pivot. And then when I looked across the street and there's somebody who built something better, I was still stuck with the thing that I built. So you really want to limit where your resources go as your core proprietary development tool, and then leverage everyone else's money that they're spending in order to enhance your product experience so you can pivot on a dime. So if you're integrated with AWS, for instance, and Microsoft Teams has a better integration tomorrow, you can pivot on a dime because that storage facility is now offering so many more things. So that's where the CEO earns his money. Where do I build and where do I leverage? And what I learned a long time ago, and it was best to partner with huge companies because the huge company's biggest weakness and biggest need was customer acquisition. But look at Zoom. Why did Zoom need me? Right? Because they're a technology company. They were not customer acquisition experts. That was never their strength. Still, wasn't for COVID, they'd still be at only 15 million people a month using their platform, right? And so whether it be Shopify or Amazon, I'm saying when you can build a technology that acquires, at the end of the day, acquires customers, now go back to Facebook, buying Instagram, buying WhatsApp, it's because their weakness was acquiring customers. That's the value. So that's what I meant is think of customer code. Does your technology create a customer code? And I say the biggest mistake I make when I look at people's business plans and I get to the point of how you're going to go to market, you can tell there's no passion in it because that's not their expertise. The expertise was creating the product and service. and you just think that's a hireable moment. That is a strategy that you can, research. It's not. It's the hardest skill set to find, is so old school, is a great salesman, a great sales strategy. And the best salespeople that I've ever experienced are the ones that can't sell something they don't believe in. Right? That's a real salesman. They can sell anything, right? The Wolf of Wall Street can sell you a pen, right? But notice the long-term salespeople are the one who come across authentic. You come across as authentic with expertise, you'll be around forever.
Yeah, I resounding big agree with everything you just said. I have a lot of my own stories that resulted in me coming to similar conclusions, but I don't want to make this go on for another 2 hours telling them. So yeah, any other final thoughts, I guess, before we wrap things up?
No, I always tell people that most people I meet, they dream too small. They can give me 10 reasons off the top of their head of why they won't make it, and they struggle to tell me why they will. It happens every conversation, right? And that's why so few people make it, because it's the ones that have the 10 reasons of why they absolutely will make it is the ones that do. And so I actually kind of learned that lesson from my own father, right? Who I always thought worked harder than anyone else in the world, 3 jobs, anything, sacrifice for his family, but he never picked a job that had a high ceiling. So all he had was the greatest success at a level that was never earning what he was worth. And so that's what I took from him, is if I could work as hard as he did, but pick something where I could dream much bigger than he had an opportunity to do, then I knew that I'd be okay. And whether it be your employees or whether it be the person you fall in love with, if they don't make you a better person, you won't be a better person and you won't make it, because no one's in this journey alone. Mm-hmm. And so be really careful. There's a famous quote from a guy named Jim Rohn. He says, you become the average of the 5 people you talk to the most. And if you look at that in your life, I guarantee you that's true. And so that would be my takeaway. Who you surround yourself with is who you'll become.
Humans are social creatures. And I would argue our relationships are probably the most important parts of your life, period. They're going to be the most impactful. They're going to provide you the most health, the most joy, the most experiences. I think it's something that people for a while got kind of, forgot about. So it's good to hear how much this is coming up now in a conversation, just the people around you and making sure they're great people.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. We really appreciate you sharing all of your experiences and your thoughts. Really insightful. Do you have any kind of final things to call out? Maybe your website or any socials for people to follow you on?
Yeah. Our website is www.mypxch.com. The X is kind of like an I and a T in one. That's our branding. So got to look cool on a t-shirt at some point in the future, right? So it's www.mypxch.com. And let me just say, if there's any of your listeners that ever want to just talk, I'm happy to offer that. And you can find me through Justin. But any advice, any questions, it doesn't have to be just this hour. I love giving back, and I'd be happy to advise and mentor anyone else who has any other thoughts in the future.
Cool. Thank you so much, Steve.
Okay. Bye, everybody.